here. We have more than a critical mass, so I want to maximize the time we have together, so we should get started now. Most of you know that I'm Clark Irvin, the former Inspector General at the Department of Homeland Security and the Director of the Homeland Security Program here at the Aspen Institute. Welcome to the Aspen Institute to all of you, and especially to those of you who are unfamiliar with us. And speaking of the possibility of some being unfamiliar with us, I should just quickly mention that we've got 2 or 3 signature events, one of which is, and perhaps the premiere of which is, the Aspen Security Forum, a convocation of top-level president and former government officials, industry leaders, financiers, journalists, including our moderator today, and concerned citizens to discuss and debate the major issues in homeland security, counterterrorism, and national security writ broadly every summer at our campus in Aspen. The dates for this coming summer are July 17 to 20, and I hope to see all of you there. We've launched a new initiative called the Ambassadors Security Roundtable, whereby on a quarterly basis, thanks to a very generous contribution we've gotten from AGT International, we convene ambassadors on a regional basis to discuss common and differing approaches to security issues. And we also have a private group called the Aspen Homeland Security Group, of which Gene Meserve is a part, which is a group of former government officials and journalists and other opinion leaders to give advice and recommendations on an informal basis to Secretary Napolitano and other Homeland Security leaders. And then finally, we have a number throughout the year of discrete, targeted events, of which today is an example. And we're very, very pleased to have the sponsorship today of Booz Allen Hamilton. Thank you very much for your support today to discuss the critical issue of border security, which I'm sure, as prominent as it is, will only become more so in the new year with the new administration, the re-elected administration, and the new Congress. To moderate today's discussion, I'm very pleased to have an old friend of mine who is known to all of us, I know, Gene Meserve, who I think it's fair to say has defined Homeland Security reporting. She covered the issue of Homeland Security for CNN from the very beginning, September 11, through the 10th anniversary, longer than any other reporter in the country, I think it's fair to say. Jean is currently a senior fellow at George Washington University's Homeland Security Policy Institute, run by my colleague Frank Slufo, whom all of us know. She's also, as I mentioned in passing, a member of the Aspen Homeland Security Group. She is president of Shore Road Multimedia, which offers an array of communication services. And she is a scholar as well, having gotten a BA in English Literature from Middlebury College, and she's a recipient of the college's Alumna Achievement Award. With that, Gene Meserve will introduce our panelists and then moderate the day's discussion. Thank you, Gene.
Clark, thanks so much, and thanks all of you for being here this morning. I looked back this morning at the 9/11 report to see what they had recommended in terms of border security, and let me just go over their principal recommendations for you. The U.S. border security system should be integrated into a larger network. A comprehensive screening system should be developed whose standards should be extended to other governments. There should be extensive international cooperation. They recommended a biometric entry and exit system. The commissioner said the challenge is to see the common problem across different agencies and functions and develop an architecture for effective screening. They also said that the screening system should look for particular identifiable suspects or indicators of risk. That was 11 years ago. We've made some progress, but clearly we haven't attained all of those goals. And in that time, the threat has changed, the challenges have changed, the budgetary reality has changed. So with this panel, we hope to push things forward a little bit, look down the road to see what we might be able to do in this very different environment. And here with me, a very distinguished panel to discuss this. At my far right, Nelson Bolito, who's president of the Border Trade Alliance, which advocates for policy initiatives that improve border affairs and trade relations. Prior to that, he led the private sector division of FEMA, where he won numerous awards. We also have with us Admiral Thad Allen, now a Booz Allen Senior Vice President, a former Commandant of the Coast Guard, who I'm sure all of you know, led the response to the BP oil spill and was the principal federal officer for the U.S. government response to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. And immediately to my right, Thomas Winkowski, Acting Chief Operating Officer of Customs and Border Protection. He oversees the daily operation of this massive bureaucracy, which includes 60,000 employees. He's had a long and varied career in law enforcement, and I'm going to try and be nice to him, even though he's from Haverhill High School, which was my high school's principal rival on the football field. But I'll try and be nice to him here. Have we buried the hatchet?
Yes, we
For
have.
the afternoon, okay. All right. Before we look far into the future, I'd like to look a couple of weeks into the future. The fiscal cliff. Word from Capitol Hill is that a compromise does not look particularly likely at this point in time, though Lord knows in 6 hours that read could change, but at the moment it's not looking good. And I'm wondering what's going to happen if a compromise is not reached. Mr. Winkowski, you must have made contingency plans. What's going to happen?
Well, we're still absolutely making contingency plans and working through the issues. I can tell you that as we continue to work through them, you know, the number one priority is making sure that bad people, bad things don't come into the country, and that's our men and women out in the field that do that for us day in and day out. And if we fall with the fiscal cliff, I can assure everybody that from a standpoint of border security, we will continue to be out there. We will continue to protect the nation, but we do continue to work through plans, and we look at various options. There's lots of questions. If this were to happen, from a standpoint of the impact of the money, how would that be rolled out? Is it a one-time grab of money? Is it spread out over a period of the remaining fiscal year? So there's still a lot of questions, but you know, from a standpoint of security, we look at the Homeland Security Act of 2002. We were created to make sure that dangerous people and dangerous things don't get in the country, and that will continue to be our focus.
Mr. Polito, are you concerned about the impact on commerce?
You bet. You know, we already received some slash in overtime budget dollars this fiscal year, $21 million to be exact. And there's no question that today, with the border wait times that we have across our borders, both on the northern and southern, any less hours spent not only looking at POVs, privately owned vehicles, but also commercial trade would absolutely affect. So we're concerned that the fiscal cliff may affect overtime, personnel, and actual time on that port to scan for bad guys.
Admiral Allen, whether or not we go over the cliff, the budgetary situation is likely to become more difficult over time. Is that the underpinning of this conversation going forward? Should we just assume we're going to have to be doing more with less?
Well, I'd separate the fiscal cliff from the fact that efficiencies and effectiveness are going to have to come into play, because the current long-term debt situation is not going to allow business as usual across government. I think there's a longer-term issue right now that's growing, and we have effects that are multiplying on each other. We're operating under a continuing resolution in fiscal year 13. We have not closed on the fiscal year 14 budget, which would normally be done several months ago in advance of the State of the Union speech. We have sequester lurking out there. If it goes into effect and they have to take the cuts in FY13, they've been under a continuing resolution that assumed a funding level will not be the baseline for sequester. If you're trying to run a government program, run an acquisition program, deal with contractors, and contractors are included in this too, this is a very uncertain time on which to operate, and frankly does not produce the best government effects. So I think long term the sequester is an issue. The longer-term issue is the lack of consistency and predictability and the amount of money these agencies have to do their jobs every day, and I think it's a real problem.
I want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, you know, Customs and Border Protection, when we were created in 2003, we had a $5 billion budget, and today we have an $11 billion budget. And we saw a lot of growth. Border Patrol doubling their numbers, technology, the infrastructure put down on the south, particularly the southwest border, some plus-ups at the ports of entry, and some plus-ups in our air marine program. But there's no doubt that you know, the horizon is one that we have to really be focused in on and really become more transformational in how we do our business and looking at how we do our business today versus how we're going to transform to another way of doing it, which is already taking place in Customs and Border Protection when you look at it from a standpoint of global trade and travel. The way in which we handle global trade and travel is much different than the way we handled it when we first stood up in 2003 and been able to gain a great deal of efficiencies.
But do you believe for a minute you're where you need to be, particularly in this new budgetary environment?
Well, I don't think, you're never where you want to be. But we have been very, very fortunate as an agency to have such a large plus up. But we have been, very, very focused in over the past few years on how we're going to transform Customs and Border Protection, how we can become more effective and efficient. We knew this day was coming. And we knew with the growth that we had over the years that at some point, the growth was going to stop. And so we have been for years really focusing in on the whole issue of advanced information supply chain security, our efforts between the borders.
Mr. Bolito, in the meantime, the infrastructure at the border has decayed further. Major investments are needed, correct?
Major investments are needed. GAO has determined that about a $5 billion at least in investment is needed.
This is on the southern border?
Well, on the northern and
Northern
southern
and
border.
southern.
There's no question that the border wait times that we're experiencing, some of it has to do not only with personnel or technologies, but obviously the infrastructure that's basically woefully, to be frank. And I think what we need to do is not only stress funding for that, but I think the future is going to be public-private partnerships. There's a current bill that we've been pushing through Congress with Senator John Cornyn that talks about public-private partnerships. I think the days of free money are over, and the ports need absolute infrastructure, especially the ones that are west of El Paso on the southern border that are fully dependent on the federal government for funding, where the other ones do have a tolling mechanism. I really believe that that's absolutely needed. But also we need to look at Mexico. And I think we need to work with our partners south of the border to be able to look at lane segmentations, things that can be done to on the approach to that border that will assist once they get to the border. A lot of that times what happens when you're talking just, well, the fast lane, for example, that was created after 9/11, that it's the same funnel of trucks going in, and then only to the last minute do they peel off. Well, sure, it's fast when they peel off, but how about fast getting to the port of entry? So those are things that I think we need to work very closely with our partners south of the border to be able to speed things up. And those are investments that we'll keep on giving.
Can you embrace that?
Yeah, I think we have been fortunate. Under the Recovery Act, we got over $700 million for new facilities and facility upgrades on the northern border as well as the southwest border. The San Ysidro is going through a $700 million redesign. So money has been sent into major ports of entry, but it's not all about brick and mortar. Brick and mortar is one piece of it. It's about different ways of looking at segregating risk, different ways of transporting cargo around ports of entry with the right type of tracking devices, electronic container security devices, things of that nature. So it's not all about brick and mortar. Brick and mortar is very, very expensive. The upkeep is huge. The rents are huge.
And would you embrace a public-private partnership?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think that is one of a key point here that Nelson's making, that a public-private partnership is very important.
There are three different baskets, I think, when you look internally, at least three different baskets at the question of border security. People, information, and technology. I think we've touched on a lot of those. Admiral Allen, let me ask you about the cyber piece of this. It sort of changed the definition of what a border is, hasn't it?
Well, it has, and the term I like to use is cyber touches everything. We are so dependent on our networks and the internet for everything we do. It's hard to discount cyber and the threat presented by cyber. Excuse me. And in what we do on a day-to-day basis. If you add to that to the fact that, and this reinforces what Tom said, many of the efficiencies that have been gained in Homeland Security, especially in Customs and Border Protection, have been in a virtual realm where they're looking at algorithms that can take a look at shipping information and detect risks and patterns there. It's advanced screening in a place like Dublin, so when you get on the airplane, you've already gone through TSA and CBP screening, you're effectively in the United States. And you put that all together, you have a physically and a geographically described border, then you have the virtual border that's out there. Collectively, that's how we execute our sovereign authorities as a nation. And the better that's integrated and the information flows between them, the more effective that border function is going to be for the country.
So how do you make all that information flow more effectively? Cloud computing, is that the solution?
Well, I think high-performance computing and cloud analytics are out there. It's very difficult to bring those kind of technologies into the government, and I'm not just speaking about CBP right now. We have a lot of legacy systems where the data is actually handcuffed to proprietary software and other infrastructure.
And there were also statutory and legal constraints on some
That's
of the
correct,
information.
and frankly, leadership and cultural issues in some cases as well. And I think we need to attack all of those because it'd be a shame if we couldn't take advantage of the advances in technology in computation and analytics on big data to try and, as Tom said, you want to look at risk, but one of the ways you look at risk is you look at patterns. And our ability to develop pattern recognition on large sets of data, I think, would be a huge step forward, not just for CBP, but the entire department.
Can you give me an
everybody.
example of how data could be better used?
Well, there are a lot of databases right now across the Department of Homeland Security. I don't want to become CBP-centric here.
Sure.
You know, the Coast Guard has databases on ship arrivals, merchant mariners, ship inspections. CBP has data on license plate readers, video that comes when the car crosses the border, license plates are captured. We have entry and exit information in CBP and also in TSA and USCIS. To the extent that we can use, in my view, a cloud architecture to get better security at the cell level when the data comes in so we can actually ensure that privacy and civil liberty concerns are met, I think we have the opportunity to put that data someplace where everybody can have access to it and use it.
Is there too much faith in what data can do for us sometimes? I mean, the GAO issued a report just in the last couple of months on the automated targeting system, which CBP uses on cargo overseas, and raised the point that the government, in their view, had not been rigorous enough in testing its effectiveness and whether it works.
Well, I would speak in generalities and I'd let Tom address any particular issues on CBP, but it has been demonstrated in the commercial world, in Amazon and Google and other places, if you put this data where it can be accessed by a number of users and you put the right security and accreditation and access on the data as it's ingested, you can protect civil rights, personal identification, and you can come up with a much larger way to enrich that data and use it to make decisions. I think that possibility exists for government right now. Again, I think it's trying to move from proprietary systems to more open systems, and the acquisition rules associated with that and how you actually deal that, and then the base funding to find that and reinvest when you're in a zero growth environment.
Yeah, I agree with the Admiral on that. The GAO report talks about measuring our effectiveness. We agree with the GAO. We're going to certainly address those findings. I think the other thing with what Thad's talking about is going more to a common vetting type of system. When you look at, you know, the department was stood up. We're coming on to our 10th year anniversary here next March. We're still growing. We're still maturing. We had you know, lots of legacy agencies come over. So I think we're still moving ahead. We have a lot of different vetting systems that are now beginning to merge. So I think from the standpoint of being more effective, more efficient with our systems and policing the data and getting the right data in there, that we've made a lot of inroads, but we still have a ways to go.
And certainly that's the case with commercial. I think commercial makes it a lot easier to be able to get the updated manifests and data exchange. But, you know, for my municipalities on the U.S. borders, their concern is people crossing the border. And the more people that cross that border, the more money they make. The more people stay at our hotels, buy gas, go shopping. The #1 shopping mall for Simon Malls per square foot is actually McAllen, Texas. You know, these are facts that not only help the quality of life across our borders, but also it's something that needs to take a look at. And obviously, it's resource intensive. The same guys that look at, by the most part, look at the trucks also switch over once in a while and go to the other primary inspection stations where they look at POVs. But those are things that absolutely need to take a look at. And how do you get that advance warning that someone's coming to the border in a car? That makes it a little bit more difficult to get those things. And that's when maybe, like we talked about, the brick and mortar, the personnel, making sure that we have proper staffing, that when you're approaching the border, there's not 7 lanes staffed and 3 empty. We want to make sure all 10 are staffed. But that goes back to the overtime pay, the personnel, and so forth. Which, in my opinion, and the guys in blue have been understaffed, where the guys in green, which we all support, have been doubled in the last 5 years. $1.2 billion flows through that southwest border on a daily basis in trade. That's not including the investment that we get from the publics. And it's what can that rise to? Could that be 1.4, 1.5? I mean, as we look at Mexico being the new China, in billions of dollars of investments going into Mexico, these are things we have to prepare for to be even more competitive as North America.
You want to respond to that?
Yeah, I certainly think from the standpoint of the strategy of standing up the department that the strategy was that we had to do something between our ports of entry, and Border Patrol has done that very, very well. When you look at the decrease in apprehensions, you look at the whole issue of the infrastructure that's put in place, the technology that's been put in place. Now the focus is clearly shifting, in my view, to the ports of entry. Just recently, the new president of Mexico wrote, I thought, a great editorial on November 23rd in the Washington Post talking about the importance of trade and travel and how our economies have to be integrated. So, one of the things in field operations and the men and women in blue that we have done is, I think, put together a very, very comprehensive workload staffing model. So the days are gone when you can go up and say, I need more positions, and if there's the political will, you get the positions. Now you have to have the right numbers, you got to have the analytics, you got to have the analysis down, and you have to tie it to all the complexities of the mission. I think we've done that. We were tasked by the appropriations to do that, and I think we have a great workload staffing model that tells a story that's still being vetted through the organization.
Although there are still wait times of a couple of hours at some border crossings.
It depends. I mean, sometimes it's 20 minutes. Sometimes it's 20 minutes. Sometimes 3 and 4 hours. I know I've sat in Laredo many times years past, depending on also on the seasonality, where you have 3 and 4 hour wait times to cross our border. That's a barrier to trade, especially during the Christmas time, for example, when a lot of these folks come over to the U.S. to shop and stay and visit, and that's a concern because how much money are we leaving on the table in an environment where we all want to increase more tax revenue? These are things that obviously we have to take a look at.
But as Nelson well knows, in a number of these locations, staffing all the booths take place, but there's not enough booths to staff to
That's right.
the whole
That's
issue
right.
of infrastructure. But this is where we need to get more people into the Sentry program, the trusted traveler program, so we can take the low risk, segregate them, and put them in a different part of the processing queue. And a lot of the challenges, and Nelson touched on this, is just getting that traffic into the United States and being able to take the trusted travelers, put them in the right lane 3 miles before they come into the
That's
port of
right.
entry instead of having to merge. So there's those types of infrastructure challenges that we have.
You mentioned the new president of Mexico. I know Secretary Napolitano and Alan Burson and some other people are down meeting with representatives of the new administration right now. What difference do you think it's going to make having a new president there?
Well, I think I can tell you, I've been here just a little over 5 years, and I look at where Mexico was when I came here 5 years ago and where they are today, and it's a huge change from the standpoint of all of the enhancements and improvements in Mexico. And I think they'd be the first to say they have a ways to go. I think this new president here is read the editorial, he's concerned about security, but he also understands the importance of the economy and tying our economies together, and making sure that travel and trade are foremost on the table, along with security. I think that's somewhat of a shift, and I think Nelson agree on that. You have to. Oh, I'm sorry. You have to keep in mind here that there's huge potential in Mexico. Good friends, good allies, lots of resources there. As a matter of fact, if you took the 4 U.S. Border states and that butt up against the 6 Mexican states and combined that as the 4th largest GNP in the world. So there's huge opportunity there in Mexico, and I think what you're going to see here, at least what I've been reading, is this particular president really moving out on that particular trade and travel agenda.
Are there some specific steps that the U.S. government is asking him to take? Are there things you're putting on the table in the meetings this week?
Well, it's the first meeting with the new administration. As you said, the secretary's down there to talk about information sharing. I think that's extremely important that we continue to open up opportunities to share information.
Although there's some nervousness about sharing information.
Sure. I mean, we got to have the right safeguards in place and things of that nature. I think also the 21st Century Border Management Initiative that we have with our friends in Mexico, continuing to push that agenda. We're going to see in the not-so-distant future CBP officials in Mexico clearing freight and having that freight come into the United States. At Otay Mesa, we have Mexican customs officials in Laredo, Texas, at the airport clearing freight that's going into Mexico. This is all in an effort to speed up our efforts in facilitating legitimate trade, as well as a huge undertaking on our part is reducing transaction costs. I mean, if we're going to be competitive in the world, we're going to be competitive with India, we're going to be competitive with Brazil and all the other countries, we have to reduce transaction costs. We have to make it cheaper. We have to, our responsibility here is how can we get that cargo in faster, and at the same time making sure we're not letting bad people, bad things into the country, and that we're collecting the revenues and things of that nature. These initiatives with Mexico, as well as our friends up north in Canada with Beyond the Border, are a huge undertaking that really starting to make the border much more transparent, much more transformational in nature.
Nelson, I know you have some thoughts on what you'd like to see.
Well,
done.
as soon as the Enrique Peña Nieto was elected, I started getting together with their transition team and have been working with them now for months. And as you know, they've now been installed for a little bit over a week. Some of the things that we've been talking about is obviously their southern border. But their securing of their southern border is absolutely necessary. Not only is it very porous, but I believe that they don't even know how many people are crossing that border. Approximately 1,400 kilometers of southern border with Mexico, with Belize and Guatemala needs to be secured. Not only does that help the flow of illegal substances going through Mexico.
Those would be drugs.
Right, drugs. Drugs, thugs, and bugs. But I think that it also curbs the illegal immigration of OTMs, which sometimes butt up to 40 to 50% of the apprehensions on our U.S. border. So we need to hold them responsible, I think, and they're very much open to that, securing their southern border. The second thing that they're talking about is Mérida 2.0. Obviously, we need to solve 1.0 first. There's still some money still there from the State Department, but 2.0, because they want not only our assistance in better intelligence, but also capturing the bad guys. They know that the assistance that we've offered so far has been helpful. They want more, and I believe in order to be able to pump those trade numbers up and for security reasons and really get that free flow of commerce back and forth, obviously that needs to happen. And obviously the infrastructure that I've been talking to them, again, going to those ports of entry, the infrastructure that will keep on giving if in fact it is built out. That will absolutely help the free flow of trade into our ports of entry, so once they get there, the guys in blues can take over.
Yeah, I think we need to understand that the challenges that Mexico faces right now, and they have made progress against the drug cartels. But I think we need to understand the larger systemic issues associated with transnational organized crime as it relates to north-south, what I would call threat vectors in the Western Hemisphere. I think Nelson's got it right on, and I think President Nieto and his staff would say the southern border is an area of focus for them. I think we need to understand that the illicit flows, whether it's drugs or human beings, and the money that goes both ways is a sustaining resource for criminal institutions and ultimately terrorist activities as well in other parts of the world, because these are all illicit networks that need illicit cash to flow, to operate. And I would say that when we get back to the data sharing and how we all interact together, I think knitting together a national task force concept that links together U.S. Southern Command and Joint Interagency Task Force South, the El Paso Intelligence Center, the OCDETF Fusion Center, Air and Marine Operations Center in Riverside that CBP operates. We have tremendous opportunities, to, I think, to improve that. It is terrific right now. We have some of the best interagency cooperation in those places that you can probably find in the federal government. But I think this is one of those areas where if we can break down the walls on the data, there's a lot we can do to attack these networks.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Guatemala is a big issue that I believe the Mexican government will address that particular issue. By them doing that, has many benefits for us, obviously, on our southern border, their northern border. I think that's a big issue. And I agree, from the whole standpoint of information sharing and data sharing.
What are you seeing in terms of migration at the moment? The U.S. economy is starting to revive. Are you seeing more people coming across, and what is the proportion of OTMs?
Well, our apprehension rates for last fiscal year, about 350,000 apprehensions, way down from a high of 1.6 million not so many years ago. Border Patrol has areas like San Diego, for example, where just streams of people would be running across the borders in between the ports of entry and at the ports of entry. They're down to 50, 60, 70 apprehensions a day. El Paso, hundreds of thousands running through, now 25, 50 a day. Arizona, way down. The issue with the southern border and the OTMs, other than Mexicans, we're starting to see an increase. It's not huge, but nonetheless, we have this issue with Guatemala and Mexican border, and I think by addressing that particular issue, we'll see a whole different result. I think, we know it works because we saw it with Indian nationals about a year or so ago, 2 years ago. We saw an upsurge in Indian nationals coming in, and by having continued to develop and strengthen our relationship with Panama, we were able to institute a number of processes and procedures and tactics, and those numbers have virtually disappeared. So, the international relationship, the partnerships, whether it's Mexico, Panama, or other friends all around the world, are absolutely critical from the standpoint of the flows, and absolutely critical from the standpoint of trade and travel.
Just one clarification here. The OTMs that you're seeing, are they primarily from Central and South America, or are they from elsewhere?
Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras.
Getting deeper a little bit into this whole idea of sharing information, you mentioned the program with the Canadians beyond the border. Just yesterday, I picked up the Globe and Mail, and the Canadians expressed their disappointment in that program in the article I read. One of the quotes was, "Many businesses remain skeptical that much will come of the BTB as regulators in each country remain protective of their own rules and jurisdictions." If we can't make this work with the Canadians, who can we make this work with?
Well, I think we are making it work with the Canadians. I'm not familiar with the article that you read, but I can tell you I'm personally involved with all of the initiatives and Beyond the Border, which is 32, and which CBP has close to 16 to 18 of those major initiatives. When it comes to information, when it comes to data, there are a number of safeguards that we have to make sure that we have in place. The Canadians have their privacy issues they have to deal with. They have very, very strict privacy issues and statutes and regulations, as do we. So, as we continue this effort of blurring the lines, we continue this effort of being more transparent, we're going to bump up against some of these things, okay? And that was well expected when President Obama and Prime Minister Harper signed off on Beyond the Borders. We know that, but we continue to work through those issues, and we've got our privacy principles out there, and we continue to make inroads. People expect instant results. You're not going to have that in issues that are this complex and far-reaching. We're making great inroads in our pre-inspection scenario process up in Blaine, Washington, where we're going to have officers up on the Canadian side, right off in Blaine, pre-clearing trucks coming in, and then we're going to go to Peace Bridge. I mean, these things take time. There's certainly a lot of different cultural changes that we have to go through, but there's a lot of this information flow, and we're going to be, sharing of information. We need to make sure that we safeguard that information.
Admiral Allen, how do we get to the point where you want to be when there are these sorts of concerns?
I think it's a matter of how you insert technology into the current processes and how that's different from the current infrastructure, hardware, and software we use. If I could just maybe explain in a little bit more detail. We're able to do things with data when we bring it into a database now that are far more advantageous. We can put controls on the data because with higher levels of computational speed, which have come about in the last decade, we can do things with that data to make it easier to handle that we couldn't do before just because of lack of computing power. So you can actually create more transparency when you bring the data in. You can actually lock down rules associated with a single set of data at the cell level regarding security, accreditation, who has access to it, who's tried to access it. You can actually put in rules related to privacy and civil liberties. The real issue is making the transition where you can get that data where you can treat it and meet all those rules. I think there's actually a way where we can actually improve our performance on privacy and civil liberties, but it's going to take a transformation of the infrastructure and how we treat the data. It's a technical issue.
Yeah, okay, so there's a technical issue, and I'm sure there's all this software and technology out there that you could prove protects the flow of that information. That's one issue, and it's an important issue, but it's really changing people's mindset. Who's getting that information? What are they going to do with that information? How's that information going to, whose hands is it going to go into? And I think that's one of the big challenges, is kind of this view of if other governments get information about me, then these other things could happen. I think that's that cultural change. That's that change that we've got to continue to drive.
Can you chip away at that? Is it possible to change that?
I think over time, yeah. I think over time, people will realize that in the case of crossing borders, the bottom line is the more I know about you, the more I know about your business, and more I know about your supply chain, I can treat you differently. We used to say, hey, this is this balance between enforcement and facilitation. I say it's not even a balance anymore. If you want me to facilitate, I can do facilitation and security right at the same time. But in order to facilitate, I need to know about you. I need to know about your business. I need to know about your travel patterns. I need to know all those things so I can make the right choices and get you in the right bucket from a risk segmentation standpoint.
Tom's right in many of those points. One of the comprehensions, for example, on the northern border is, can our guys carry guns across the border?
Right.
That's a big issue for Canada.
And that's been resolved.
Yeah,
we are.
And it's been
big change.
And I think that having the pre-clearance on the Peace Bridge, which we went back and endorsed back in March 2010, is a step in the right direction. But let me tell you what's happening in the southern border. You also, Tom talked a little bit about the pre-clearance process that's happening with Mexican aduanas in the airports in Laredo. But there's also two ports that are going to experience a very similar process with northbound traffic, and that's going to be the Otay Mesa facility that's being created currently on the Foxconn plant yard on the other side of New Mexico, and one that's at any moment now is going to go on online, which is in Otay Mesa. It's going to start with agricultural first. If that works through the pilot program, they may expand that through to other merchandise. But these are things where they've created a road for our officers to go. I've toured the plant, or the facility, where an officer would go through a special road over the border, armed and so forth, and literally what I would call the gateway of the future, because on one side we have our officers, and on one side their officers. And literally you can walk across the hallway and meet in the middle and solve the issues face to face. Maybe these are the things that we need to look at in the future. You know, collaboration, face to face, you know, and solve the problems right then and there. And I have to attribute Alan Burson for his ability to really stress to CBP the communication with the southern border brethren in the expansion and the results that's happened. And a lot of these are these types of results. But Mexico paid for that infrastructure in an effort to do some pilot programs that may be the future.
I just want to give one small example on our relationship with Canada. It kind of underscores what Thomas said about our working relationship with them. For many, many years, we have managed joint waterways with the Canadians, the Straits of Juan de Fuca, the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Great Lakes, and so forth. Over the years, we have developed a relationship inside Homeland Security with Coast Guard, Customs and Border Protection, and ICE, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, to the point where we have something called a ship rider program, where we put one boat out with all the officers in it, and we can handle whatever happens on either side of the border. It was especially effective during the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, where inbound shipping was in the U.S. and outbound shipping was in Canadian waters. So there are places where we've been able to cross those cultural divides, come up with common operating practices, and achieve something that we both think is better than we've done by ourselves.
And with Beyond the Borders, one of the things that we're going to be doing, we call Next Gen. It's a ship rider, but it's letting Border Patrol and our CMP transverse between the ports of entry in and out of each other's country. Those are major steps forward.
Within the federal government, there are issues, though. It doesn't have to do just with our partners overseas. DHS was stood up in an effort to eliminate stovepipes, and yet one continues to read and hear about the fact that agencies even within the department are not always cooperating, much less with departments outside. Why are we still at that point? How do we do away with those stovepipes?
Well,
Can it be done culturally? You speak as a legacy customs.
Right. Yeah, you talk about stovepipes in the federal government. When I came into this business in the 70s and went to Los Angeles International Airport, it took 3 port directors to run LAX. When I went to Miami as the director of field operations, when I met the admiral, it took 3 port directors to run Miami International Airport. Why? One from the Customs Service, me, right? Treasury. One from Immigration, Department of Justice, and one from Agriculture, USDA. It's 3 different departments with 3 different views of the border, or 3 different visions of how they're going to manage a border, and then 3 different agencies, Customs, APHIS, and INS, at the port director level, with yet different views. I think one of the major step forwards, and more governments are coming to this model, is unifying the borders. So now you have one single port director running LAX and Miami. You have one agency, CBP, that owns the entire border. Right? It's Customs and Border Protection. We own, the ports of entry. Right? We own between the ports of entry, and we own, the air on the border, along with some Coast Guard stuff too. That's a huge, major step forward. Okay, people thought, hey, this is not going to work. It has worked. Do we still have more growing to do? No, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. UKBA, British Customs, they're in that model. You've got other agencies, other countries that want to go to that model. So I think we've made huge inroads in cutting down stovepipes. But nevertheless, I think you're seeing with CBP and TSA, pre-check, right? You know, global entry, trusted travelers, and then TSA being able to take that idea and doing special lanes for those people that are low risk based off of a number of factors, including our program, Global Entry, a trusted travel. So I think we've made tremendous inroads in the last 10 years. That doesn't mean we're perfect. That doesn't mean we don't have some of those challenges. But when you think of taking this massive bureaucracy and putting it together and unifying what we've done on our borders, 10 years is not a long time.
Admiral Allen, you want to weigh in? You were inside.
Yeah, well, when I first met Tom in Miami, our unifying cohesion down there was a combined federal campaign.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Let me take a different tact on what makes this harder than it needs to be, and I'll say this so my fellow panelists don't have to say it. When we created the Department of Homeland Security, we aggregated agencies and put them together. We didn't reinvent anything. We just combined everybody or recombined them. In the case of CBP, and I will say this because it's got to be painful for them, the original streams that supported those three lines of work that Tom talked about, agriculture, immigration, and customs, collected fees that provided personnel costs. We have never collapsed those fees into a single system. We never created a predictable way for CBP to understand how much money is coming in relation to how they pay for their workforce. And there's an annual agonizing process inside CBP to try and figure out what are all the sources of money and how do you pay for your workforce. And I think we need to start at the building blocks, you know, the blocking and tackling, and how to tackle some. And a lot of this stuff resides in Congress and their ability to kind of clean up the funding sources that just got thrown together and make this more of a rationalized system so they can at least estimate their personnel costs.
So how big a problem is Congress? You have, what, more than 100 committees
Well,
and subcommittees up there claiming jurisdiction just over the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, let me separate into appropriations and authorization, and these are confessions of a former budget officer in the Coast Guard. I'm recovering. The appropriation side, there is single committee oversight. What we have there is a complicated appropriation structure that doesn't help anybody. On the authorization side, we have never unified authorizing a committee structure, so there's a single committee. The Coast Guard remained in T&I because there was really strong political support not to have them move out of transportation to begin with, but if they were going to retain oversight in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee in the House. The upshot of all that was I spent 4 years as a commandant of the Coast Guard and never got an authorization bill. We have to clean up the authorization side of the House. On the appropriation side, it's structural related to how the accounts were brought together.
So Congress has to clean up its house.
I think that's one of the unanswered recommendations of the 9/11 Commission.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Do you feel that there needs to be, any of you feel that there needs to be a reorganization within DHS? Is it time to rethink how things are structured and put the pieces together differently?
I think before any more reorganizations take place, I think there needs to be a baseline assessment of what was the result of the aggregation of all the authorities and the jurisdictions that took place in 2003. In other words, the Coast Guard authorities didn't change. We came over. The CBP authorities were an aggregation of immigration, agriculture, and customs. I don't think we ever stopped back and said, what is it we want to accomplish as a department, and do those authorities and capabilities and jurisdictions get us there? I think a baseline, in my view, it should be associated with the Quadrennial Homeland Security Review. There ought to be a baseline assessment of the authorities and the jurisdiction is, are we able to accomplish with what we get from Congress in terms of money and statutory authority what this department needs to do now, and in my view, that would be the starting point.
But it hasn't happened yet.
No, I think it should, part of the Quadrennial Homeland Security Review.
Okay. I'd love to open it up for questions here. I'm sure a lot of you have perspectives on some of these issues and would love to hear what these guys have to say. So, anybody out there? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, hi, I'm Ted Alden from the Council on Foreign Relations. I had two questions, southern border related. Sentry, what's your evaluation of how much is done to actually take the pressure off the rest of the border? Has it really been effective in segmenting a traffic in a way that helps the rest of the border? And does it raise new security concerns? Because, you know, obviously one of the incentives for the cartels is to find people who are in Sentry and strong-arm them in one way or another into helping them move drugs or people or something else. And just, I'm going to do a twofer, which I normally hate, but I want to ask as well about the exit checks for firearms and bulk cash. I've heard from people in the border region that these have become a significant additional source of delay. What's the plan for those kind of exit checks going forward?
Well, maybe I can start off and hand it off here. I think Sentry, all of our trusted trader and trusted traveler programs, I think, have been really game changers in the way in which we do business. So you look at Sentry, we've seen huge growth in Sentry. It's a key piece of how we segregate the risk on the southwest border. You look at San Diego, for example. Last time I looked at the numbers, about 28 to 30% of traffic that comes over there every day are Sentry members. You're able to do much better from the standpoint of lane management, being able to, knowing your flow, being able to open more lanes for Sentry during peak periods and then closing them down and going to ready lanes or going to the traditional lanes. So the Sentry program is absolutely critical. We need to continue to grow that. I kind of look at it as kind of Easy Pass. You know, when Easy Pass first came out, I'm going to say I'm not going to buy one, and then slowly as you go over the Bay Bridge, there's less and less lanes open. You're waiting longer and longer. You decide to go out and buy one. So, we need to make sure that we're having that kind of effect on people to force them to get Sentry passes, and those that can't get it, we have ready lanes, and using the technology and WITI, the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, which was part of the 9/11 Commission. I still remember you up in the northern border freezing when we put that thing up there.
Yep.
And
I remember too.
Gene was very disappointed. There were no long lines and it all went well. Only kidding.
like
So I mean, the trusted travel program is absolutely critical. From the standpoint of outbound, we have played, I think, a much bigger role in outbound. I don't see the outbound operation becoming like an inbound operation, but we do have about 110 crossings. Some of them have very, very old infrastructure, so as we're building new ports of entry, the outbound piece is part of that to be modernized. Installing state-of-the-art license plate readers and having a much more of a presence in the outbound arena. Whether you're in the Customs Service or CBP, until Secretary Napolitano came here, we kind of were fickled, if you will, on outbound. Do we play a big outbound role, whether it's at land borders or in airports? Some believed yes, some believed no. Certainly when Secretary Napolitano came in, she was very, very focused on outbound. We had a lot of success from the standpoint of money, but we have to be careful from the standpoint of backups, to your point, because the Mexicans are also doing much more at their ports of entry than they were doing 5.5 years ago when I came here.
But what about this concern that trusted shipper programs simply are a blueprint for the bad guys? They know who to corrupt.
No,
because
so yeah,
it's in the
that's
program.
one other piece. I mean, we have certainly you're going to have, and we got data on this, that you're going to have people that pass all the vetting for a trusted traveler and smuggle dope. That's why we got a whole series of different mechanisms in place from the standpoint of enforcement operations that we do on Sentry lanes, from the standpoint of statistical sampling and pulling people out of lanes and doing inspections. So we have a number of safeguards in place. They're certainly not 100%, but we do recognize that we are going to have people that are going to compromise that particular privilege in being a trusted traveler. That doesn't mean the program doesn't work. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast that we have down, particularly in the southwest border.
The trusted crosser programs, I think once you get to the lane, it works. It absolutely facilitates that flow. The question is getting to that lane is most of the issue. Southbound operations continues to be, they are random. They're always. However, I'd like to see in the future where that is shifted south of the border. I don't see that happening in the near future, but it is something that we have worked with the Mexican government in negotiating, that we will help them in their fight against the bad guys. And this is one way. And it's also staffed by local, state, and federal. So it's not only federal, but no question that by having a federal presence there, that takes money that could be spent in the inspection side. So I'd like to see that in the future sometime, perhaps shifted south of the border.
I think just a quick note on southbound. We're pretty much in a zero-sum environment right now regarding personnel as far as growth in the current budget environment. So if you're looking at a port director and he's got a southbound problem, he's going to be taking people off northbound to try and accommodate that. So there's this introduces, again, if you can be more effective and efficient, then you can take your people and spend them where you get the highest return on it. But I think everybody needs to understand that there's a set capacity right now in terms of personnel at the border.
And northbound is going to get more attention every time, right?
That's correct, right? There's no doubt about that. When you're not staffing all the booths because of perhaps a traffic flow, and you think you get 3 or 4 booths up, and you're going to send them southbound. As soon as that traffic starts picking up, they're taken off and handled on the northbound traffic, because we are concerned about wait times. We are concerned about those kinds of delays. But like I said earlier, as we continue to move along with workload staffing models, I think we have a good story to tell. And it may be a bad time in Washington, D.C. to go and say, hey, I need more. Nonetheless, you got to have the right numbers. You got to have the analysis and the rigor behind it. We have that. And I think with, what we're talking about with Mexico and their commitment on particularly the travel and trade side, I think we'll begin making some progress.
Over here.
David Trulio, Raytheon Company. I'm also a senior fellow at the Homeland Security Policy Institute. My question has to do with elaborating on the call to action to industry. So in addition to customers being well represented here, industry is well represented here as well. Themes in the discussion so far: data analytics, non-proprietary open systems, privacy. Totally get that. Right now, industry's having some challenges as well, but we're also thinking about what are we going to invest in going forward, and what are some of the biggest pain points, and where do you want to see innovative solutions? And I realize paying for development is not what's in vogue here, but sort of what do you need us to do? Because ultimately and fundamentally, we're here to be of assistance.
Come up with a magic bullet. Would you do that?
Can you find me some good fixed integrated towers? I'm Brukowski. I'm not going to have it next year, okay?
Can we say SBI?
Yeah, I mean, so, certainly, and I'm joking just a little bit on that one. But I think, to me, advanced analytics is a huge piece that we need to continue to make inroads on. I think the other issue, we have this whole issue of 100% scanning hanging over our head. I think that was created by Basham over there when he was commissioner, but we still have that hanging over our head.
Created by Capitol Hill.
Yeah. We just got Secretary went in for an extension earlier this year. So, but we continue to work through finding the right kind of technology. We really need anomaly detection type of equipment. That can really pinpoint in all these containers what the anomaly is and what areas we should be focusing in with a great deal of accuracy. Where's the lead box in that container? Where's the radiation device in that container? I think those, the advanced analytics, anomaly detection type of software is really, really important to us.
I'd say also the ISR piece is going to become more important since we're restricted on the amount of personnel we have. Autonomous vehicles, ability to take that information and bring it back and knit it in with the other information and produce a common operating picture that can be acted upon, it's actionable. I think that's huge. I think biometrics and nanotechnology are going to produce some breakthroughs. I don't know where we're going, but I think it's entirely possible in the next decade we'll be doing DNA testing like we do fingerprinting right now. There's a whole issue of national repositories of data and where we're going with that. Right now we have a national FBI fingerprint center, but it's not well positioned at this point to be able to ingest those other types of biometrics. So I think there are a lot of things out there we can be looking at in relation to technology.
And I think you'll see the next few years Well, we'll always take fingerprints. The iris is going to play a much bigger role in the area of biometrics. And a matchup between the iris and the fingerprint. Certainly in my world of ports of entry, doing this to people, that takes time. By being able to look at these iris on the run type of systems and look in and capture the iris, I mean, it takes off huge seconds off of the processing.
You know, Dave, anything that we can get to the inspector sooner, quicker, faster, prior to the shipment or the inspection taking place, is obviously, I believe, is going to be play a future role. And that's not even talking about the any type of exit system that you alluded to early on, that will cause a whole host of other problems for the border.
Are you going to have the money to buy this stuff if they make it?
Well, we'll certainly go out and fight for it. I think, you know, in this budget climate that we're facing here, I think we still have an opportunity to sway and influence the appropriators if it makes sense and if it's going to cut down on cost, if it's going to make us more efficient. I still think we have that opportunity. It's how you present it. It's how you frame the issues. But certainly, you know, from the standpoint of if it's going to make you more efficient, if it's going to make us more secure, I think we stand a good chance of at least being able to get in the door and have a discussion.
Yeah, if I could just add a quick comment, I think this gets back to the appropriation structure. If there was a way where you could generate capital up front to make improvements, and then the savings associated with that, you offer some of those up, but you're able to keep some of that in the agency to be able to do reinvestment. We have a hard time making that calculus work between the administration formulating a budget, OMB reviewing it under a different set of eyes, or sometimes with a political lens, then trying to drive that into the appropriations process. But clearly, if we're going to have public-private partnerships or we're going to introduce this technology, this can be self-funded through efficiencies if you're allowed to retain the savings.
Right here, you had a question? Could you turn on your mic? Thanks.
Actually, my question has already partially answered, but just to reframe it, An Duong from DHS S&T, the observation is, as the agency, in this case CBP, double the budget from it was first created, $5 billion to about $11 billion. Of course, we all know that a lot of that budget went to hiring agents and also building infrastructure and buying equipment. So again, the observation from the S&T side and the industry R&D vendors is that, or the worry is that with the predicted budget crunch or drawdown in the near future and many years to come, maybe CBP won't be able to afford buying new technologies, not because CBP is not convinced that new technologies will be helpful, but CBP will be hard-pressed trying to just protect the people that they already hired and buying and paying for O&M for the equipment that they already bought. So it's mainly just a cost, dealing with just cost O&M rather than taking a look at new technology or technical opportunities. So I would like to see if you might be willing to share with us some thoughts about budget priorities. For example, OTIA budget, is there a thought of fencing OTIA budget to some extent? Because again, our observation is that's where acquisition touches new technology and not just O&M. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the O&M is is an absolute killer. You can afford to buy the device, you just can't afford to operate it. Right. And that certainly doesn't, I think that was always one of the issues with these myriad initiatives. You could give them equipment, but couldn't maintain it, because at the end of the day, that's what really is a drag on the budget. You know, when you look at our budget, 70% of our budget is salary and expenses. 70%. In field operations, it's over 90%. So over 90% of the $3 billion that's in field operations is salary and benefits. I think if the current talk with the budget and continues 14, 15, and beyond, which I have no reason to believe that's not going to be the case. I think we're going to be focused more and forced more to perhaps look at streamlining numbers of people and adopt and going to more different kinds of technology. So let me give you an example. And we didn't talk about this, so I'll throw this out, Gene. In my view, when you look at the southwest border and Chief Fisher, and I've had this discussion a number of times with the technology that we can put up in the sky, I think that's a game changer, what General Kostelnik has been able to do since him coming into CBP 6-7 years ago. He has really changed the way I think CBP is going to be looking at the southwest border, particularly between the southwest borders. And we all have UASs for the southwest border. We have the Guardian for the ocean side, which, by the way, seeing the shift of the Pacific, more and more boats coming up with dope, and I think a lot of that has to do with what Border Patrol's been able to do, has really been able to displace this, and that's what that doubling of the Border Patrol and spending billions of dollars was able to get us, and I think that's a good thing. Whenever you can displace things, that's a good thing, and Border Patrol's been able to do that in my mind. But I think we're going to be faced more and more with patrolling on the southwest border is going to be from the sky. Okay, you're going to have these UASs up there for 20, 21 hours, nonstop, hanging with the right technology.
But you still
looking
need
down.
the people
Well,
to
you
stop
still,
the things.
yeah, you do, but you become a lot smarter. You can position Border Patrol agents, right? You know where these people are coming in. You've got the patterns. You've got all that. Eyes in the sky. You've become, I think, another layer of sophistication on being able to go in and apprehend. So I believe on the air side, that's going to change the way in which we're going to be looking at the southwest border. So
Yeah,
I think that's what technology gives us.
To your point, it's we also need to hold Mexico accountable. I think they need to do more. The southern border issue with their southern border is something that actually will assist our operations as well. But we need to hold that government accountable to do their part, whether that's through the Merida program and other things. No question that once, I believe the cartel issue will probably go away in the next few years.
You do?
I
Tell me
believe so.
why.
Well, I think that not only are we looking at innovative ways and sharing more intelligence with the Mexican government on a daily basis, and they want more, because now what they want to do is do more surgical type strikes instead of just have this global war throughout their country. Again, with my conversations with the transition team. But, one of the things that they want to do is they want more assistance from our military. For the first time, I saw a quote from the not yet president, but the president-elect, looking at ways that possibly they would look at having mix our military with their military on the ground.
On the southern
as
side of the
trainers,
border?
as trainers. Well, no, in Mexico, with trainers and so forth. So I believe that train the trainer programs like that, and they're a constant assistance, because that's going to help trade. It's going to help the illegitimate crossers. All that stuff will help in the assistance in really making Mexico flourish and grow.
Admiral, you dealt with the smuggling issue up close and personal as Commandant. Do you believe in 2 years this could go away?
I think it's going to happen. I think the timing, yeah, there's resources and everything associated with it. There was a turning point in Colombia where they had just had enough. And they were also able to break the link between terrorist organizations down there and their reliance on the drug trade to finance. And I think all that is starting to come into focus in Mexico. I think what's going to enable us to be successful in helping them is kind of an extension of the conversation we had about the Canadian border, but it's a different set of issues with the Canadians. If you take the metropolitan area of El Paso and Juarez, okay, if you're down there and you're talking on a radio or you're talking on a cell phone, those radio waves do not recognize the border, but our laws do. So trying to put together a comprehensive surveillance program that deals with cell phones on both sides of the border, intercepting of radio traffic, to try and get patterns on what the bad guys are doing, are things that we are working right now with Mexico and need to continue to work. But there's a host of legal issues associated with that, and we're sitting there right beside each other with those things happening in the atmosphere above the metropolitan area. And I think those are the areas where, both through policy decisions, legal agreements, and then training and technology, we can start basically jointly managing what I would call that battle space.
Admiral, to your point, the people of Mexico at one point and traditionally have never wanted any type of military assistance from the U.S., never wanted any type of intervention. Obviously, intel and the issues that they have with their cartels now for so many years, and on the deaths and so forth, they're now realizing that a Band-Aid approach, like we've had in years past, that they've put is no longer really viable when they need major surgery to really just get rid of the problem. Like what you said, Colombia got to a point where they said, enough's enough, and we need all the help and assistance. We need to get rid of it.
Yeah, and this is a judicial reform, prosecutorial reform, structural issues in the elements of civil society that allow them to act with unity of effort inside the country. I think it's coming to Mexico as well. I agree with Nelson.
Yeah, and I think when you look at what the Calderon administration has been able to do, new prisons, a judicial system, as Thad's saying, rule of law, the importance of the rule of law. I believe it's all coming together. Like I said, hey, 5 years ago when I came here, it's much different than today. And I can tell you, in 6 years when this president leaves office, the Mexican president leaves office, that country's going to be much different. I think the cartels are, I'm not sure about 2 years, but I can tell you.
A few years. I don't know if it's 2 years. I said a few years.
But already their capability has been diminished. They're not totally gone. They're still a force to be reckoned with. But the Mexican government is making some, I think, huge inroads. If Burson were here
There's just so much money at stake, though. Aren't they just going to get more clever about what they do?
Well, Gene, I think here's where the game changer's got to be. If you look at this from a strategic viewpoint, and I don't want to make too many analogies that aren't understandable, but if you look at what we've done with arms control around this world and how we finally attacked it, what we have is we have a superior overmatch with the drug cartels in computation, spectrum, and bandwidth that we are not exploiting to defeat them. And when you talk about autonomous aerial vehicles, you talk about data analytics, it's where we have the capacity they don't, that we're not realizing, that could make this asymmetrical from them having the benefit of not operating under the rule of law to us being able to actually leverage the technology that we've created in this country and what we can do, and I think that's what we've got to do.
And if Burson were here, he'd talk about the mafia, right? I mean, we basically got rid of the mafia in this country. It took us a while. I mean, he draws that analogy to what's happening in Mexico. And sure, there's lots of money at stake here, and something else will happen. They'll go elsewhere. Other industries will open, if you will, quote-unquote industries. But there is no doubt where I sit, where the chief sits, and looking at what's happening down there, that huge inroads have been made. And I think with what the president is saying, the new president of Mexico is saying, and what he's written in the editorial, that will continue.
And we are on the cusp of having a tremendous shift where from the cocaine-producing countries in the Andean region, we're getting very, very close where the aggregated amount of cocaine that is leaving there is not coming our direction. And countries like Brazil are finding out this is a serious problem that they have to contend with. And the reason it's flowing other direction, it flows through the path of least resistance. That tells you where you need to queue up next, but it also tells you there's starting to be some hold.
Yeah.
And we have to realize also, the Border Patrol has done a great job. Why is it that we have this border violence, or south of the border violence that we have today? Well, we've doubled our Border Patrol. We have cameras and situational awareness that we didn't have before. We have a fence at many parts of that southern border. We are disrupting their illegitimate trade and travel routes, and they're fighting for space. And that's basically what's happening south of the border. The drugs have always flowed, unfortunately, this way, but now we're disrupting those routes. And that's one of the things that we should be proud of, because not that we would never want violence, but that's a result of our action on our southern border to be able to disrupt these bad guys and the cartels and the illegal flow of drugs. And that's one of the things that we should be proud of, because not that we would never want violence, but that's a result of our action on our southern border to be able to disrupt these bad guys and the cartels and the illegal flow of drugs. And that's one of the things that we should be proud of, because not that we would never want violence, but that's a result of our action on our southern border to be able to disrupt these bad guys and the cartels and the illegal flow of drugs. And that's one of the things that we should be proud of, because not that we would never want violence, but that's a result of our action on our southern border to be able to disrupt these bad guys and the cartels and the illegal flow of drugs. And that's one of the things that we should be proud of, because not that we would never want violence, but that's a result of our action on our southern border to be able to disrupt these bad guys and the cartels and the illegal flow of drugs. And that's one of the things that we should be proud of, because not that we would never want violence, but that's a result of our action on our southern border to be of drugs and thugs. So I believe that we're going to continue doing that, but we also need to help Mexico rid the rest of the cancer.
We had a question over here.
Thanks, Gene. Chris Kelly with Booz Allen. So I'd like to go back to the discussion you guys were having about the economic engine that's sitting there that needs to be unleashed and the challenge associated with the $5 billion investment that you mentioned earlier, Nelson. Because I thought the conversation around the table around the opportunity for public-private partnerships emerging is a model that we're seeing a lot more, even in our own region here. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what is the thinking, where are you in the journey, what are the implications, what's going on there?
I think our border is just one part of the process. The free flow of goods and services is part of the process. In talking with the new administration, not only do they want to make a more favorable climate for future investment, but for the first time, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago, car production in Mexico has surpassed Canada. Automotive, aerospace is moving by leaps and bounds. Billions of dollars are being invested. 22 states in our union are now #1 trading partner is Mexico. I believe that the climate needs to be right. The security issues need to go away, the cartel issues, which I think eventually will. But besides that, you're looking at a 6% on the average, year-over-year, climb in trade. I really believe this is going to be even more. They're shooting to become a G8 country in the next 5 years.
So
that's going to be a major force. And again, for North America, that we should be celebrating that.
I think you've got some strong economic arguments. What are some of the ideas on the table around how these partnerships could manifest? Are people going to start building their own infrastructure? Is it going to be cooperative ownership? Is it going to be, what are we going to see?
South of the border, you're already having some ports of entry. The Zaragoza port of entry off of in El Paso does have a lane segment that is a public-private partnership. Perhaps that's going to be the wave of the future. On the Mexican side, certainly they do a lot more public-private partnership in highways and infrastructure all over their country. In my opinion, much more advanced than we are, like Spain and others. A lot of foreign investment. I think we're going to see that. And like I said before, the days of free money are over. We need private-public partnerships to step in order to modernize our ports of entry for the future. So I think you're going to see a lot of companies chomping at the bit if we can get this bill passed.
Yeah, so I think the devil's always in the detail, and I think our laws have to be changed, and we have to have the will to want to do this instead of talk about it. I always find it much easier to manage when I had a lot of money and when I don't have a lot of money. I don't know about you guys. And there's really nothing good that comes out of budget cuts in my mind. But one thing, it becomes a forcing function. So these discussions that go on forever and ever with, the public-private discussions that we have. And, when money's flowing in, you have these discussions and they go no place. As budgets shrink, trade increases, activity increases on the border, there's no money, I think you start standing a much better chance of really getting serious and taking a look at what needs to be done to forge this public-private relationship. So these budget situations can be really a forcing function to get some things done.
We'll see. There's a question back.
Hi, Jim LeBlanc, Unity Resources Group. Given the discussion this afternoon, I was curious as to your thoughts about the old concept of North American security perimeter and whether it's dead on life support or work in progress, given most of the challenges are likely political.
Everybody's jumping for that one.
I'll take it.
Well, here's what I believe, and I see Guy Swan sitting in the back of the room. Maybe he wants to comment when I'm done. I think there's going to be a fundamental, I won't call it a sea change, I think it's going to be a slight pivot. As we finish our military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, as we pivot to the Pacific, and this gets back to something I said earlier, and based on conversations I've had over the years with the commanders at U.S. Northern Command and U.S. Southern Command, there's going to be a redefinition of what national security means in this country in terms of Western Hemisphere threats. And this gets back to the North-South threat vectors and illicit trafficking and things like that. So I think the concept will be slowly redefined. And frankly, those commanders will have to make these arguments because there are going to be resources at stake. And they see forces, Marines going to Australia. They see Paycom growing out there. I think in the long run, there's a recognition by the people that have to manage it in the Western Hemisphere that they need a clear, more defined threat in terms of illicit trafficking, transnational organized crime, the link to terrorism in South America and things like that. I'm not sure how quickly it's going to happen, but as they develop new national security strategies and with the next 4 years with this administration, I think you're going to see the discussion start to move that way. But it can't be constructed and put together the traditional way we think about, alliances and partnerships and all that kind of stuff. It's going to have to include the private sector. It's going to take into account the advances in technology that I talked about, and how do we collectively as a hemisphere take advantage of those overmatches that I talked about in computation, spectrum, and bandwidth, especially in our ability to increase maritime domain awareness, sense what's going on out there, and start separating legitimate traffic from illegitimate traffic, target the high-risk areas, and then collectively, as a community in North America, go after them.
Yeah, and I agree with what the Admiral said on that, and I think also when you look at Beyond the Borders, I mean, that's one of the major initiatives of Beyond the Borders, and again, like I said, the devil's always in the detail. I think it's something that we have to continue to work through. I think I think the Admiral's right. That whole dynamic of how we look at national security is changing and will change and will continue to change. So I think there'll be some challenges on certainly how we define perimeter security and what it's really all about. But I really see that especially for us in North America here, it's a big piece.
Any other questions out there?
Gene, I have
Yes.
one. And Mr. Winkowski, I would like to go back to Gene's very first question on sequestration of fiscal cliff. It is my understanding that in the Border Security Technology Fund, CBP has somewhere around $400 million in unobligated funds, and the rumors are that CBP has offered up over $70 million of that back to go towards sequestration for this coming year. Mr. Winkowski does a great job in meeting with industry and trying to get technology and understanding of it. Chief Fisher has huge needs on the Border Patrol side, as your former group at OFO have, but the procurement system at CBP doesn't seem to be able to spend the money that it's got.
Yeah.
How do we get past that hurdle and deploy what Congress has in fact given you as opposed to what you need?
Yeah. I used to be the assistant commissioner for field operations, and I used to always blame the procurement people for everything when I didn't get my equipment. And then I get up on this different branch in this job and start looking down and really starting to understand procurement. And I realized that we were a big part of the problem as the operator, because we kept changing our requirements, which meant we kept delaying contracts, we kept delaying awards. So I've spent a lot of time with Rick Guntherson and those folks that head up the procurement office to really look at a different way of looking at and executing procurement. So whenever I come to these functions, and I tell this to Rick all the time, I always have an individual, and you'll be that individual, that raises this whole issue of procurement and that we don't do a good job with it, we don't bring industry in, and I'm not a procurement a specialist, and we all know none of us want to go to procurement jail, but at the same time there is an opportunity here for us to bring industry in at the right time. I know Mark's got that down in a very, very big way, and sending out notices and that, and I understand that as you're looking at putting together proposals that's costing companies money. We look at integrated fixed towers and things of that nature off the shelf software. You have to stand up offices and work through this, and it costs money, and the process goes on and on. So, we had an industry day, right, Mark, not too long ago. I think that's a step in the right direction. I think the other thing that I've talked to Rick about is really reaching out to associations that procurement type associations, and perhaps you can point me in the right direction of sitting down with some leadership and say, what's the path forward in your view? So here's one of the things that we're going to do. one of the things is we're coming up on our 10th anniversary here, creation of CBP in March. And one of the things that I had talked to Deputy Commissioner Aguilar about was to go out and really have these what I call strategic dialogues. So take a number of issues, one of which would be procurement. And with the help of Mark and Eugene and Rick, to really do a deep dive from the standpoint of, how do we, in the next 5 years, 10 years, what does the agency need to look like? Get information from our stakeholders, our customers, as well as our employees. But really, focus a great deal of attention in some areas that I think haven't gotten a lot of attention, and that's areas like procurement. I'll be frank with you. We put up this CBP in the middle of a war in this country, on 9/11, and I think we've done a good job. I think we've done a real good job. We have ways to go, but I think it's now time to really kind of get into some of these other areas, such as procurement, and really become more state-of-the-art, more open from the standpoint of how do we bring industry in, when do we bring industry in, and I'm certainly not an expert of that, but I am open to sitting down with the right associations, the right groups to talk through it, because every session I go to, this particular issue comes up.
We're just about out of time. I'd like to button it up by having each one of you put on the table one action step, one thing that you'd really like to see happen in the short term to try and improve this situation and better secure our borders and facilitate trade.
Well, our major action is getting free flow of trades of goods and services over our U.S. borders. One of the things that I'd like to see is a public-private partnership bill pass in Congress that will free the arms of our ports and cities and municipalities out there that have jurisdiction over these ports or within or